When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was how cold the floor was. My cheek was pressed against rough carpet, and my head throbbed like I'd been hit by a train. The second thing I noticed was the silence, thick, heavy, unnatural. I blinked a few times, struggling to focus. My ribs ached, and my shoulder felt wrong, but I couldn't remember why. I pushed myself up to a sitting position, groaning as I took in my surroundings. The room was small and unfamiliar. An empty office space or motel room, maybe. A single broken lamp sat in the corner, its shade askew. My heart started pounding. Where the hell am I? I glanced down at myself. My shirt was wrinkled, and my hands were dirty. My phone? Gone. My wallet? Missing. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind. The last thing I remembered was being home. Carla, my wife, had gone out, something about her dentist appointment. It had seemed normal at the time. Ordinary. But nothing about this was ordinary. I staggered to my feet, wincing as my side flared in pain. The door wasn't locked. I stepped outside into a dimly lit hallway, the hum of flickering fluorescent lights making my skin crawl. I didn't recognize the place, and the heavy, quiet scent chills down my spine. A convenience store sign glowed faintly through a dirty window at the end of the hall. I stumbled toward it like it was a lifeline, trying to ignore the nausea bubbling in my gut. When I pushed through the glass doors of the store, the cashier, a teenage kid with greasy hair, froze mid-sip of his soda. "Whoa," he said, looking me up and down. "You okay, man? Where am I?" I croaked, my voice hoarse. He frowned. "East Ridge, near the old highway." East Ridge? That was 2 towns over from where I lived. My stomach sank. "How did I get here? Can I use your phone?" I asked. The kid nodded, sliding his cell across the counter. My hands shook as I dialed Carla's number. It rang once, twice, then voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Come on, I muttered, slamming the phone down. My head was spinning. Carla would know what happened. She had to. I called my sister, Rebecca, next. She picked up on the second ring. "Jake." Her voice was sharp with concern. "Where are you? Carla's been calling, everyone looking for you." "She what?" I breathed, leaning heavily on the counter. "She said you left the house last night in a rage," Rebecca continued. "She's worried sick, Jake." "What's going on?" I felt like the ground had shifted under me. "I didn't leave the house. I don't remember anything." "Where are you now?" "East Ridge. I woke up here. I don't know how." "I'm coming to get you," she said firmly. "Stay put." Rebecca arrived 30 minutes later, her face pale when she saw me slumped on the curb outside the store. "Jake, what happened to you?" she asked, gripping my shoulders and searching my face. "I don't know," I muttered. "I can't remember anything after last night." She helped me into the car, her worry written across every line of her face. "Carla said you were acting crazy, yelling and breaking things. She said you left." I turned to her, stunned. "That's not true. I didn't do any of that." Rebecca frowned, her expression hardening. "Something's not right, Jake. You think—" I shot back, trying to make sense of it all. "Carla's lying, Beck. I know it. When we pulled up to my house, Carla's car was in the driveway. The lights were on inside, and my stomach twisted into knots." "Do you want me to come in?" Rebecca asked. "No," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "I need to handle this." She nodded, watching me carefully. "Call me if you need me." I climbed out of the car and walked to the front door, my pulse thundering in my ears. I had no idea what I was walking into, but one thing was clear. Something was very, very wrong. I let myself into the house. The air was still, but I could hear faint sounds coming from the living room. Carla on the phone. I stepped around the corner just as she hung up. When she turned and saw me, her eyes widened. "Jake," she gasped, rushing toward me. "Where have you been? I've been so worried." I stepped back, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't. Just don't." Her expression faltered. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "I woke up in some dump 2 towns over with no memory of how I got there. And now I hear you've been telling people I went crazy and stormed out." Her face paled. "Jake, you were scaring me last night. You were yelling. You." "Stop lying, Carla," I snapped, my anger boiling over. "I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I don't know what happened, but I know you're lying to me." Carla's hands trembled, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape. "Jake, I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," I said coldly. and I'm going to find out what you're hiding. For the first time, I saw it, fear flickering across her face. And I knew. I wasn't crazy. Something was wrong, and my wife was at the center of it. I stared at Carla, my hands still trembling with anger. For years, I'd known her inside and out, or at least I thought I did. But the woman in front of me, this nervous, shifty version of her, was someone I didn't recognize. "Why are you lying to me, Carla?" I asked, my voice cold and deliberate. "I'm not," she insisted, wringing her hands together. "You've been acting so strange, Jake. Maybe you just don't remember what you did." Her words hit me like a slap, and I nearly laughed. "You're trying to gaslight me now? That's rich, Carla. I woke up bruised, miles away from here, with no phone or wallet, and you're telling me I just forgot?" Her face crumpled like she wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. It was all for show, and I saw right through it. "Who were you on the phone with just now?" I demanded, my voice sharp. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before she recovered. "No one. I was calling around looking for you. That's all." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Stop lying, Carla. I'm done being played." "Who was it?" "Jake," she said softly, almost pleading. "You're not making any sense." That was when it hit me. She wasn't going to break. Not yet. Carla was digging her heels in, and I couldn't force the truth out of her, no matter how hard I pushed. Fine. If she wasn't going to talk, I'd find answers another way. I grabbed my keys and turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Carla called after me, her voice nervous. "To figure this out." She moved to follow me, but I stopped her with a glare. "Don't. Just don't, Carla." I left without another word. Rebecca was waiting for me when I got back to her place. "What happened?" she asked, watching as I paced the living room like a caged animal. "She's lying," I snapped. "She's hiding something, Beck. I can feel it." "Are you sure you're not just angry?" she asked carefully. "You've been through hell, Jake." I stopped pacing and turned to face her. "You think I'm making this up?" "I woke up with bruises, Beck. Bruises I didn't get on my own. Someone did this to me, and Carla knows who. Or worse, she's involved." Rebecca's face softened, and she nodded. "Okay, so what do we do now?" "We dig," I said. "If Carla won't talk, we'll find out the truth ourselves." That night, I lay on Rebecca's couch, scrolling through my bank account online. Something wasn't sitting right with me. Carla had said she'd been calling people all night, worried about me. But there were gaps in her story, places where her timelines didn't add up. I clicked through our shared bank account and froze. There it was, a charge for $500 from the day before, listed under a name I didn't recognize, Haven Hills Dental. My stomach sank. The dentist? Carla had told me she had an appointment earlier that day, but $500 wasn't a normal cleaning. I stared at the screen, dread curling in my gut. Why would she need that much cash for a trip to the dentist? Dr. Morris. The next morning, I called the dentist's office from Rebecca's landline, masking my number. A chirpy receptionist answered, completely unaware of the chaos she was about to feed into. "Haven Hills Dental, how can I help you?" "Hi," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm calling to confirm my wife's appointment from yesterday. Her name is Carla Connolly." "One moment, please," the receptionist said cheerfully. I heard the sound of typing before she returned. "Yes, Mrs. Connolly was here yesterday afternoon. Dr. Morris saw her for an extended session." "Extended session?" I repeated, my skin crawling. "What does that mean?" "An advanced procedure," she replied vaguely. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" I forced a smile into my tone. "No, that's all. Thank you." I hung up the phone, my jaw clenched. She lied. She hadn't just gone to a dentist appointment. She'd been there for hours with him. And what the hell cost $500? I grabbed my jacket and turned to Rebecca, who'd been watching me silently from the doorway. "Where are we going now?" she asked cautiously. "To see Dr. Morris," I said, grabbing my keys. Haven Hills Dental was located in an upscale plaza on the edge of town, with a pristine white sign and glass windows that gleamed in the sunlight. Everything about it screamed polished and professional, but all I saw was a lie. Rebecca stayed in the car while I walked in. The same chirpy receptionist greeted me with a bright smile. "Hi, Mr. Connolly," she said. "Are you here for an appointment?" "No," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I need to see Dr. Morris. It's urgent." Her smile faltered slightly. "He's with a patient right now." "Can I?" "I'll wait," I said, sitting down in the empty waiting area. 10 minutes later, Dr. Morris emerged from the back hallway, wearing his perfectly pressed white coat and an even more perfectly practiced smile. "Jake," he said smoothly, walking toward me like we were old friends. "This is unexpected. What can I help you with?" I stood up, my heart pounding as I met his gaze. "We need to talk. Alone." He frowned but gestured toward his office. "Of course. Right this way." The moment the door closed behind me, I cut straight to the point. "Why did my wife pay you $500 yesterday?" Morris's smile barely wavered, but I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "I'm sorry." "You heard me," I said, stepping closer. "Why did Carla pay you $500? What's going on between you two?" He let out a soft chuckle, as though amused by my question. "Jake, you're clearly upset. I think you might be reading too much into this." "Don't gaslight me," I snapped, my voice rising. "I know something's going on. I have proof she was here for hours. So tell me the truth." Morris folded his arms across his chest, his calm demeanor unnerving me. "Jake, if you're having trouble at home, I suggest you speak to your wife. Bringing me into this is unnecessary." He wasn't going to break. Not yet. But as I stared into his smug face, I realized something. Morris wasn't just hiding something. He was daring me to find it. I left the clinic in a haze of anger and dread. When I got back into the car, Rebecca looked at me expectantly. "Well, he knows something," I muttered. "But he's not talking." Rebecca frowned. "Then what's next?" I stared out the window, watching the clinic disappear in the rearview mirror. "We keep digging," I said, "because this is just the beginning." The drive back from the clinic was silent. Rebecca could tell I was stewing, thoughts racing and bouncing off one another. "You think Carla's seeing him?" she finally asked, breaking the quiet. I gripped the wheel tighter, the thought making me sick. "I don't think." "I know." "Jake, this is heavy stuff," she said gently. "What if you're wrong?" "Then why'd she lie?" I shot back. "Why the $500? Why does he look at me like he's holding a winning hand?" Rebecca didn't have an answer, and that said enough. Back at her place, I sat on the couch with my laptop, digging deeper into Morris. His name was clean, too clean. No reviews on Yelp, no Facebook posts from happy patients. For someone with a polished office, it was strange how little footprint he had online. It was almost as if he didn't want to exist. I clicked through article after article, then stopped cold when I found something buried in an old news archive. Local dentist tied to suspicious business dealings. The article was years old, another town, another clinic. There weren't many details, but the name matched. Dr. Lucas Morris. "Morris isn't new to this," I muttered, calling Rebecca over. She leaned over my shoulder, reading. "Suspicious dealings? What kind of dealings?" "It doesn't say," I replied, scanning for more. "But he left that town and set up shop here not long after. He's been keeping his head down ever since." Rebecca frowned. "And now Carla's tangled up with him." It clicked then. The money, the late appointments, the fear in her eyes. Morris wasn't just a cheat. He was dangerous. That evening, I decided to confront Carla again. I wasn't going to sit back while she made a fool out of me. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. "She's ignoring you," Rebecca said, watching me pace the room. "Not for long," I muttered, grabbing my jacket. "Where are you going?" "To the house," I said. "I'll wait for her if I have to." The drive to my old house felt longer than it was. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the house was dark. Carla's car was parked out front, but something felt off. I knocked on the door. No answer. "Carla!" I shouted, pounding harder. Still nothing. My frustration boiled over, and I tested the door handle. It was unlocked. I stepped inside. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. I called out her name again as I moved through the rooms. The living room was neat, but her phone sat face up on the coffee table. A cold feeling washed over me. Carla never went anywhere without her phone. I picked it up and clicked the screen. There were messages, unread, from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Now. Don't make me come find you." My stomach dropped. It didn't take a genius to guess who the messages were from. Dr. Morris. I turned toward the kitchen window just as headlights swept across the driveway. I ducked instinctively, peeking out to see a car pulling up, a sleek black sedan. Morris. The bastard had come to my house. I didn't think. I slipped into the hallway, out of sight, as the front door creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the living room. "Carla." Morris's voice called out, calm, but edged with something sharp. I peeked around the corner and watched as he stepped inside, dressed in his pristine coat and carrying a confidence that made my blood boil. But then I noticed something else. Morris looked around, uneasy, like he wasn't expecting the house to be empty. I held my breath as he moved toward the kitchen, pulling out his phone and muttering under his breath. "She's not here," he whispered to himself. "Where the hell is she?" He punched a message into his phone and turned back toward the door, his movements stiff with frustration. The moment the front door clicked shut behind him, I let out the breath I'd been holding. My pulse raced as I stared at the empty room where he'd been. Carla wasn't just tangled up with him. She was running from him. And now so was I. The house was silent again, but the air felt heavier. Like Morris had left a piece of himself behind, a shadow still lurking in the corners. I stood frozen, staring at the door where he'd just been. Carla wasn't here. Her car, her phone, her silence. All of it screamed that something was terribly wrong. I grabbed her phone from the table, scrolling through the texts. Morris's last message glared at me. "You can't hide forever." "Hi," I muttered. "What the hell are you hiding, Carla?" I left the house quickly, locking the door behind me. Morris's car had disappeared into the night, but I knew it wouldn't be for long. He'd be back. Back at Rebecca's place, I tossed Carla's phone onto the kitchen table. She looked up from her laptop, startled. "What happened?" "Morris was at the house," I said, still trying to calm my racing pulse. "He was looking for her." Rebecca's face paled. "What? Did you see Carla?" "No. She's gone," I replied, dropping into a chair. Her phone was on the table, but she wasn't there. "And Morris, he's hunting her down." Rebecca stared at the phone, then back at me. "Jake, what if she's in trouble?" I let the question sink in, the doubt eating away at my anger. "She might be," I admitted finally, "but I can't tell if she's running from him or with him. Either way, she's not safe." Rebecca and I spent the next hour combing through Carla's phone. Most of her messages were boring: grocery lists, texts with friends about Pilates, mundane conversations about the kids. But then we found the deleted folder. Rebecca gasped. "Jake, look at this." I leaned over as she scrolled through a chain of messages recovered from the trash. "Morris, I've moved the money. Don't panic." "Carla, I don't think I can do this anymore." "Jake's getting suspicious." "Morris, you don't have a choice. Keep him off our backs." The blood drained from my face. "The money?" Rebecca whispered. "What money?" I shook my head, dread coiling in my gut. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's bigger than I thought." I couldn't sit still. Pacing the living room, I tried to process what I'd just read. Carla had been involved in something Morris was orchestrating. "I need to go back to the house," I said suddenly. Rebecca frowned. "Why? What's left there?" "There's something I missed," I replied. "A clue, anything." She sighed, exasperated. "Jake, you're spiraling. Maybe we should wait for the police." "I don't have time for the cops back," I snapped. "Morris is circling Carla like a shark, and I'm not waiting for him to get there first." Reluctantly, Rebecca agreed to drive me back. The streets were quiet as we pulled into my neighborhood. The house sat in the dark, an eerie silence hanging over it like fog. "Be careful," Rebecca warned as I got out of the car. "I will," I said, gripping a flashlight as I stepped onto the porch. The door was still locked, just as I'd left it. I let myself in and moved cautiously through the house, searching for anything I'd missed. The living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, they were all the same. But when I reached the office, something caught my attention. The filing cabinet in the corner was slightly ajar. I crouched down, pulling the drawer open. Most of it was filled with the usual: bills, old tax forms, and other paperwork. But in the back, tucked between folders, I found an envelope with my name on it. I hesitated before opening it, my pulse quickening. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Carla's handwriting. "Jake, if you're reading this, I've probably made things worse than I ever imagined. I didn't mean to drag you into this, but I was desperate. Morris promised it would be simple, a quick fix. But then things spiraled, and I couldn't get out. I'm sorry for everything. Please keep the kids safe. That's all that matters." The paper trembled in my hands. "What the hell did you do, Carla?" I whispered. I stuffed the letter into my pocket and made my way back outside, my mind spinning. Rebecca was waiting by the car, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Find anything?" she asked. I handed her the letter without a word. She scanned it quickly, her face darkening. "Oh my God!" "She's running," I said, staring off into the distance. "But not from me. From him." Rebecca frowned. "Jake, what if Morris isn't working alone? What if this is bigger than just him?" I looked at her, the truth settling like lead in my chest. Then Carla's in way more danger than I thought. As we drove back to Rebecca's, I couldn't shake the thought. Carla had been pulled into something far worse than just an affair. Morris was at the center of it, but the pieces didn't quite fit yet. The money, the texts, the fear in Carla's voice. Morris wasn't working alone, and now I had a sinking feeling that Carla had just become collateral damage. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Carla's letter in front of me. The words burned into my brain. Rebecca sat across from me, her eyes filled with worry. "What's our next move?" she asked softly. I looked up at her, my voice steady. "We find Carla before Morris does." Rebecca nodded. "And then what?" "Then," I said, staring at the letter, "we bring the whole damn thing down." The next morning, I sat at Rebecca's kitchen table, staring at Carla's letter like it might suddenly explain everything. My head was pounding, but the words wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't get out. "I'm sorry for everything." Rebecca placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of me. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too," I muttered. She sat across from me, her face lined with worry. "We need to find Carla." "But how?" "She could be anywhere." I glanced at her, an idea forming. "She left her car at the house. Morris must have taken her somewhere. That means they had to drive. If I can figure out where he's going, I might be able to track them down." Rebecca frowned. "How?" "The text on her phone. There were hints Morris was moving money. If we can connect those messages to a place, we might find him." We spent the next 2 hours piecing it together. Morris's messages referenced a drop and a place called Lakeshore. It didn't take long to figure it out. Lakeshore wasn't a neighborhood. It was an old property development near the outskirts of town. Rebecca looked up from her laptop. "Lakeshore Estates. It's abandoned. The company went bankrupt years ago." "That's it," I said, grabbing my jacket. "He's probably using it as a meeting spot or hiding place." Rebecca stared at me, her concern deepening. "Jake, this feels dangerous. Morris isn't playing around. What if he's there waiting for you?" "Then I'll be ready," I replied, more determined than I felt. The drive to Lakeshore was tense. Rebecca insisted on coming, despite my protests. "You're not doing this alone," she said firmly. I didn't have the energy to argue. The development was exactly as I remembered. Rows of half-finished houses, overgrown lots, and cracked streets leading to nowhere. A ghost town. We parked a block away, hidden in the trees. I scanned the area carefully, my gut twisting when I spotted a black sedan parked near one of the houses. "Morris's car," I muttered. Rebecca swallowed hard. "What now?" I took a deep breath. "We go in?" Quietly. We crept toward the house, the silence pressing down on us. The place was gutted. Windows boarded up, doors barely hanging on their hinges. I signaled for Rebecca to stay back as I moved closer. The front door was ajar. I stepped inside, every nerve on high alert. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I scanned the empty living room. "Carla," I called softly, my voice echoing. Nothing. I moved deeper into the house, checking each room. The place was empty, but something felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. That's when I heard it. A faint sound like a shuffle, coming from upstairs. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned back toward Rebecca, gesturing for her to stay put. She nodded, wide-eyed, as I crept up the stairs. Each step groaned under me, the sound deafening in the stillness. I reached the landing, holding my breath as I listened. A voice, quiet, trembling. "Jake!" I turned the corner into one of the bedrooms and saw her. Carla, sitting on the floor, her back against the wall. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Carla," I breathed, relief and anger warring inside me. She shook her head, her voice frantic. "You shouldn't be here." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "What the hell is going on?" Before she could answer, a cold, familiar voice echoed from behind me. "Well, isn't this touching?" I turned slowly, dread curling in my stomach. Morris stood in the doorway, calm as ever, though his smile was anything but friendly. "Jake," he said smoothly, "you just don't know when to quit, do you?" I stepped in front of Carla instinctively, my fists clenched. Let her go, Morris. He tilted his head, amused. And why would I do that? She's been very helpful, you know, but I think you've overstayed your welcome. Morris, stop, Carla said, her voice cracking. This has gone too far. Too far. Morris repeated, his smile disappearing. It went too far the moment he started sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. The tension in the room felt suffocating. My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this. Morris, I said, keeping my voice calm, it's over. The police have the evidence. It's only a matter of time before they come for you. He smirked. You really think they'll believe you? That's cute, Jake. You don't know how deep this goes. What are you talking about? I shot back. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You think it's just about me? This isn't some petty scam. There are people bigger than you or me who need this operation to keep running. You're a gnat to them, Jake. A nuisance. His words sent a chill down my spine. Bigger than him? Morris, I said, my voice even. If that's true, then you're just as expendable as I am. You're the weak link here. They'll come for you, too. For the first time, his confidence faltered. Before he could respond, Rebecca's voice echoed from downstairs. The police are on their way. Morris's head snapped toward the sound, his face twisting in anger. You called the cops? Carla whispered, her eyes wide. I told you this ends tonight, I said, staring Morris down. He looked at me, then at Carla, the walls finally closing in around him. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, but instead, he stepped back toward the door, his expression unreadable. This isn't over, Jake, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. With that, he disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps pounding down the stairs and out the door. I let out a shaky breath, my body finally releasing the tension I'd been holding. Jake, Carla whispered, her voice trembling. What happens now? I turned to her, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. Now we finish this. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her phone still in hand. The police are almost here. Morris won't get far. I nodded, pulling Carla to her feet. It's over, Carla. No more running. No more lies. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Maybe not, I replied softly. But it did, and now it's time to face it. As the sound of sirens filled the air, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, clarity. Morris was on the run. The police had the evidence. And Carla, finally, was ready to talk. The storm wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I could see the sun breaking through. The red and blue lights of the police cars flashed through the broken windows of the house as officers swarmed the property. Morris was gone, but the weight of his presence still lingered. Carla sat on the edge of the living room floor, trembling as a detective took her statement. Rebecca stood nearby, watching everything unfold, while I leaned against the wall, feeling like I was floating outside my own body. You okay? Rebecca asked softly, stepping closer. I don't know, I muttered, staring blankly at the scene. It's not over yet. Morris is still out there. Detective Hall approached us, his expression serious. We'll track him down, Jake. We've got units searching the area, and we'll put out an alert. He won't get far. I nodded, but it didn't comfort me. Morris was slippery, and I knew better than anyone how good he was at covering his tracks. Rebecca drove us back to her place later that night. Carla sat silently in the back seat, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. When we got inside, she curled up on the couch, barely saying a word. She's falling apart, Rebecca said quietly as we stood in the kitchen. Yeah, I replied, staring into my coffee. But so is he. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. You really think Morris is scared? He should be, I said firmly. He's lost control, and he knows it. That's when guys like him make mistakes. I spent the next few hours in Rebecca's living room, combing through everything again. The texts, the bank records, Carla's letter. There was one last loose thread I couldn't ignore, the money. Where was Morris moving it? Who was he working for? Carla, who'd been quiet for hours, finally spoke up from the couch. There's a storage unit, she whispered. I froze. What? Morris has a storage unit, she repeated, avoiding my gaze. He keeps records there. I heard him mention it once. Rebecca and I exchanged a look. Where? I asked. Carla swallowed hard. Near the industrial park. Unit 7C. My heart started pounding again, the familiar rush of adrenaline flooding through me. If he has records there, That's where he'll go to cover his tracks. Rebecca grabbed my arm. Jake, wait. You're not going alone. I have to, I said firmly. If I don't get there before Morris, he'll destroy everything. Carla's voice cracked. What if he's there waiting for you? I looked at her, my jaw set. Then I'll finish what he started. As I grabbed my keys, Rebecca followed me to the door. At least call Hall first, she insisted. I will, I lied, stepping out into the night. I knew this was reckless, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. The industrial park loomed ahead like a skeleton of forgotten businesses. Rows of storage units stretched out in both directions, their metal doors reflecting the pale glow of a single streetlight. I parked a block away, the silence thick and unnerving. Carla's words echoed in my head. Unit 7C. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and stepped out of the car. My breath fogged in the cold night air as I moved carefully between the rows, counting off the units. 5A, 6B, 7C. There was unassuming and locked up tight. I crouched in front of the door, my flashlight sweeping over the padlock. It wasn't new, and it wasn't complicated. A well-placed rock from nearby and a few solid hits cracked it open. I shoved the door upward, the metal groaning as it slid. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness inside, and my stomach dropped. Stacks of files, boxes, and ledgers filled the small space. A rickety table sat in the center, covered in papers and open laptops. It wasn't just evidence. It was Morris's entire operation laid out in front of me. Bank transfers, names, fake accounts. I exhaled shakily. This was it. I moved to the table, flipping through the folders. The fake dental claims were all there, but as I dug deeper, something else caught my eye, a file labeled leverage. I opened it, my pulse spiking as I scanned the documents. Photos, emails, copies of checks. It wasn't just fraud. Morris had dirt on people, powerful people. Names I recognized from the local news, from politics, from businesses around town. No wonder he was untouchable. He wasn't just running a scam. He was holding half the town by the throat. Damn it, Morris, I muttered, shoving the files into my bag. I turned to leave, but a sudden noise stopped me, a faint shuffle from outside. I froze, my breath catching. He's here. Quickly, I ducked behind a stack of boxes, killing the flashlight. The sound of footsteps grew closer, then stopped just outside the unit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the beam of another flashlight swept into the room. Carla, Morris's voice called, low and sharp. I know you're here. I gritted my teeth. He thinks I'm her. Morris stepped into the unit slowly, his flashlight cutting through the dark. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him move closer to the table, oblivious to me hiding behind the boxes. Stupid, stupid girl, he muttered to himself, sifting through the papers. You really thought you could run? He was distracted, focused on the files. It was now or never. I slipped out from behind the boxes, silent as a shadow, and moved toward the door. My plan was to trap him, close the door, and lock him inside. But then my foot hit something, an empty soda can. The clatter echoed through the space like a gunshot. Morris spun around, his flashlight blinding me. Jake! I didn't wait. I lunged forward, shoving him hard against the table. Paper scattered to the floor as Morris grunted, trying to recover. I bolted for the door, yanking it down halfway and trapping him inside. Jake! He roared, his footsteps pounding toward me. I didn't stop. I slammed the door shut just as he reached it and shoved the broken padlock through the latch. Morris pounded on the metal, shouting curses that echoed through the night. Open this door, you son of a... See you soon, Morris, I muttered, backing away. I ran back to my car, my bag stuffed with files. My hands shook as I dialed Rebecca's number. Jake, she answered, her voice anxious. I got it, I said breathlessly. I have the proof. Everything. Oh my God, she breathed. What about Morris? He's locked in the unit, I said, throwing the car into gear. Call Hall. Tell him to get here fast. What if he gets out? Then I'll deal with him, I said, speeding toward the main road. As I drove through the empty streets, my mind raced. The files in my bag were enough to bury Morris and everyone he was protecting. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter and faster. Someone was following me. The headlights in my rearview mirror were closing in fast, too fast. My heart jumped into my throat as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Morris got out, or someone's working with him. I pushed down on the gas pedal, speeding through the empty streets of the industrial park. My car roared as I swerved onto the main road, but the vehicle behind me matched every move, the beams glaring through my back window. "Come on," I muttered, sweat dripping down my forehead. I couldn't stop. Not now. The bag with the files sat on the passenger seat, proof that Morris and his entire operation were finished. But only if I made it out of here. I darted through an intersection, tires screeching as I turned onto a side street. The car behind me followed, gaining ground. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears, adrenaline mixing with a gnawing fear. The highway was up ahead. If I could get there, I'd have a shot at shaking them. I hit the on-ramp at full speed, the engine straining as I merged into the empty stretch of road. I glanced at the mirror again. Still there. Rebecca's voice rang in my head. "Call Hall. Don't do this alone." With one hand on the wheel, I grabbed my phone and hit the speed dial for Hall. "Hall here. Detective, it's Jake," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone's following me. I think it's Morris or one of his people. I've got the files, but I don't know how long I can keep them off me." "Where are you?" Hall barked. "Heading south on the 115, near mile marker 12. "Stay on the road," Hall ordered. "We've got units nearby. I'll have them intercept you." "Hurry," I muttered, dropping the phone back into the cup holder. The car behind me surged closer. Suddenly, it veered to the left, pulling up alongside me. My stomach dropped as I glanced over. The driver was a shadowy figure, face obscured by darkness, but the intent was clear. They swerved toward me, trying to force me off the road. "Damn it!" I shouted, jerking the wheel to keep control. My tires hit the rumble strip, the car shaking violently before I pulled it back onto the pavement. I accelerated, heart racing, but the other car stayed with me. Up ahead, I spotted flashing lights, police cruisers approaching from the opposite direction. Relief washed over me. I honked my horn, flashing my headlights wildly as I sped toward them. The pursuing car hesitated, then slammed on its brakes, turning sharply onto the nearest exit ramp and disappearing into the night. I slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder as two police cars skidded to a stop nearby. An officer jumped out, flashlight in hand, as I sat there panting, my hands still shaking on the wheel. "Jake Connolly?" the officer asked, approaching my car. "Yeah," I croaked, rolling down the window. "Detective Hall sent us. You okay?" I nodded, my breath still ragged. "They try to run me off the road. Whoever's working with Morris. They know I have the files." The officer glanced at the bag in the passenger seat. "Let's get you to the station. You'll be safer there." I nodded again, pulling the bag onto my lap, like it might disappear if I let it go. Back at the station, Hall was waiting for me. He looked me up and down as I dropped the files onto his desk. "You look like hell," he muttered. "Yeah, well," I replied, slumping into a chair. "I earned it." He opened the bag and started sorting through the evidence. "This is good, Jake. Really good. With these, we can take Morris down, and maybe even the people backing him." "What about Carla?" I asked. "She's here," Hall said. "She's cooperating, but we're keeping her under protective watch. Morris won't get to her." I exhaled, a weight lifting from my chest. "Good. And Morris?" Hall looked up, his expression dark. "We'll find him. It's only a matter of time." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. Hall had the files. Carla was safe for now. But as I sat there, exhaustion creeping over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Morris was out there, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. The police station felt like the safest place in the world, but my gut told me it wouldn't last. Morris was still out there, and if his operation was as big as I now believed, he wouldn't stop. People like him didn't panic. They calculated. Hall sat across from me in the small interrogation-style room, his desk littered with the files I'd brought in. "This is solid, Jake. Morris's bank transfers, the false claims, the connections, enough to bury him." "And his backers?" I pressed. Hall sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "That's the bigger problem. Morris was the face of this operation, but if he's got powerful people behind him, they'll try to cover this up. We need him alive to talk." "Alive?" I scoffed. "Morris doesn't strike me as the confessing type." Everyone cracks eventually, Hall replied, especially when they're cornered. They put me in a side office while officers combed through the files. Rebecca showed up not long after, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. "Any news?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Not yet," I muttered, staring blankly at the clock on the wall. "They're going through the files now, but Hall says Morris's backers might be a bigger threat." Rebecca frowned, her voice cautious. "What if Morris isn't the only one watching you?" The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing her say it made it feel real. "Then we need to finish this before they make their next move." An hour later, Hall returned, a grim expression on his face. "We got a lead. One of our units found Morris's car abandoned near the train tracks outside town." "Was he there?" I asked, my chest tightening. "No, but we found evidence that he's been in contact with someone, burner phones, cash, and receipts for storage units across state lines." I exchanged a glance with Rebecca. "He's trying to disappear." "Maybe," Hall replied, "but we're closing in. If Morris thinks he's losing control, he'll get sloppy. He might even reach out to you again." The idea made my skin crawl. "I'll be ready." That night, Rebecca and I stayed at the station under protective watch. Carla was in a separate room down the hall, surrounded by officers who kept a careful eye on her. She hadn't spoken much since we'd brought her in. "Do you think she's telling the whole truth?" Rebecca asked softly as we sat in the waiting area. I hesitated, staring at the worn tiles under my feet. "I think she's scared. She got in too deep, and now she doesn't know how to get out." Rebecca looked at me carefully. "And you? How are you doing?" I laughed bitterly. "I don't even know anymore. Part of me wants to see this end so I can start over. Another part of me doesn't think it ever will end." "It will," she said firmly. "It has to." Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I stared at the screen, my pulse spiking. Rebecca leaned closer. "Is it him?" "Only one way to find out," I muttered, answering the call. The line crackled before Morris's voice cut through, smooth and chilling. "Jake, you've been busy." I gripped the phone tighter. "It's over, Morris. The police have everything." Morris chuckled softly. "You think you've won? You're a pawn, Jake. Nothing more. The people I work with will wipe this clean, and you'll be nothing but a bad memory." "They won't," I said through gritted teeth. "We have enough to bury you and everyone you're protecting." There was a pause, then Morris's tone shifted. "Come meet me, Jake. Just you and me. Let's settle this." My blood ran cold. "Where?" "The old Ridgeway docks," he said calmly. "You know the place. Be there in an hour, or things might get worse for Carla and your kids." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, my hands shaking with rage. "What did he say?" Rebecca asked, her face pale. "He wants to meet," I replied, my voice cold. "At Ridgeway docks." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Jake, it's a trap. You know that, right?" "Yeah," I said, standing up. "I know." "Then you can't go," she cried, grabbing my arm. "I don't have a choice," I shot back. "If I don't, he'll come after Carla. Or worse, my kids. I can't let that happen." Rebecca stared at me, her voice softening. "Then you're not going alone." I walked straight to Hall's office, where he was still reviewing the files. "Morris just called," I said. "He wants to meet at Ridgeway docks." Hall's face hardened. "Did he threaten you?" "Indirectly. He brought up my kids," I said, trying to stay calm. "I know it's a trap, but this might be our chance to get him." Hall nodded slowly. "We'll set up units nearby. You'll go in as bait, but we'll have eyes on the place. Morris won't see us coming." "Fine," I said, my jaw set. "Let's end this." The drive to Ridgeway docks was quiet, the air heavy with tension. Rebecca sat beside me, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. "Jake, are you ready for this?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I muttered, staring at the dark horizon ahead. We pulled up near the docks, where Hall and his team were already positioned. Officers moved silently in the shadows, preparing for whatever was about to unfold. "Stay close, Jake," Hall warned as I stepped out of the car. "Once we see Morris, we'll move in." "Got it," I said, my breath visible in the cold air. The docks were deserted, the faint sound of water lapping against the pylons the only noise. A single floodlight illuminated the far end of the pier, casting long shadows across the rotting wood. I stepped onto the pier, my footsteps echoing. "Morris?" I called out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. Morris, calm and smug as ever, his hands in his coat pockets. "You actually came," he said, shaking his head. "You're dumber than I thought." "I'm not afraid of you," I shot back. He smirked, stepping closer. "You should be." I glanced around quickly, scanning for signs of Hall's team, but I couldn't see anyone. Morris noticed. "Looking for someone?" "You're done, Morris," I said. "The police are here. It's over." Morris chuckled softly. "Is that what they told you?" Before I could react, headlights flared to life at the end of the docks. Two black SUVs rumbled toward us, cutting off my escape. My heart sank. He wasn't alone. Morris grinned, his voice low. "I told you, you don't know how deep this goes." The black SUVs rolled to a stop, engines humming like predators waiting to pounce. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Morris smirked, stepping closer. "You thought this would end clean, Jake," he said calmly. "You don't understand the game." I glanced toward the far end of the pier, desperate for any sign of Hall's team. Nothing. "Where's Carla?" I asked, stalling for time. Morris tilted his head, amused. "Safe for now. But you, Jake, you're out of moves." One of the SUV doors opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, sharp suit, cold eyes. Not one of Morris's lackeys, someone worse. "You didn't tell me he'd be this much trouble," the man said, ignoring me entirely as he addressed Morris. "He's a loose end," Morris replied, his tone shifting to something submissive. That's when I realized Morris wasn't in control. He was just a puppet. The man looked at me finally, his gaze chilling. "You've been a problem, Mr. Connolly." "I'm just getting started," I shot back, refusing to let him see my fear. He smiled faintly. "That's unfortunate." He nodded to someone behind me. Before I could react, two men grabbed my arms, shoving me to my knees. My heart pounded as Morris crouched in front of me, his face inches from mine. "You brought this on yourself," he sneered. A voice crackled through a radio suddenly, faint but clear. "Units in position. Move in." The men holding me stiffened. Morris's smirk disappeared. "Jake," Hall's voice boomed from the far end of the pier. "Step away from him." Floodlights blazed to life, blinding everyone. Officers swarmed the docks, shouting orders. The grip on my arms loosened as chaos erupted. Morris bolted for the SUVs, but Hall's men were faster. I scrambled to my feet, sucking in a deep breath as I watched officers tackle Morris to the ground. "It's over," Hall shouted. I stumbled back, Rebecca running toward me from the shadows. "Jake!" I caught my breath, my voice shaky. "We got him." Morris was hauled to his feet, his face pale as officers cuffed him. The suited man was gone, vanished into the chaos. But Morris was finished. Rebecca gripped my arm, her eyes wide. "Is it really over?" I looked at Morris, defeated and silent, as they dragged him away. "For him? Yeah," I muttered. "But this fight isn't over yet." The drive back to the station was a blur. Rebecca sat beside me, silent but watchful, as I stared out the window. Morris was gone, hauled off in handcuffs, but I couldn't shake the image of the suited man disappearing into the night. Hall met us as soon as we arrived, his face serious but satisfied. "Good work, Jake. Morris won't be hurting anyone else." I nodded faintly, my thoughts elsewhere. "What about the others? His connections?" Hall sighed. "We're working on it, but these people don't leave paper trails. They'll scatter now that Morris is down." "Yeah," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "That's what I'm afraid of." They brought Carla in to debrief her again. She looked drained, like the last bit of fight had gone out of her. I stood in the hallway, watching through the window as Hall questioned her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked softly when she emerged, her voice thin and tired. Carla looked at me, her eyes red. "Because I knew you'd hate me, and because I didn't think I could get out. I wanted to be angry. I was angry, but seeing her like this, small and broken, made it harder." "You let him drag you into something you didn't understand," I said, shaking my head. "I let it happen," she corrected. "And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Back in the waiting room, Rebecca handed me a coffee. "What now?" she asked quietly. "Now," I exhaled, staring into the dark liquid. "Now we pick up the pieces." Rebecca sat beside me, her voice steady. "Jake, you won. Morris is done. That has to count for something." "Yeah," I replied, staring ahead. "But it doesn't feel like a win." That night, I lay awake on Rebecca's couch, the events replaying in my mind. The files, the texts, Morris's smug face. It was over, but it wasn't finished. Morris had been a front for something bigger, and the suited man I saw was proof of that. Carla had survived. I had survived. But somewhere out there, the people pulling the strings were still watching, still moving pieces on their board. For the first time, though, I didn't feel powerless. They'd made a mistake. They'd let me see too much. Morning sunlight spilled through Rebecca's kitchen window, but I wasn't comforted by it. I sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at my phone. Hall had called earlier. Morris was in custody, but he hadn't said a word. "What are you waiting for?" Rebecca asked softly, sitting down across from me. "For the other shoe to drop," I muttered. The truth was Morris's arrest hadn't brought me peace. The man at the docks, the one in the suit, was still out there. And if Morris wasn't talking, then whoever he worked for wasn't finished. Hall called again, just after noon. "Morris lawyered up," he said grimly. "He's refusing to cooperate." I sighed. "You didn't really think he'd roll over, did you?" "I was hoping," Hall replied. "But we're still combing through his records. We'll find something on his associates eventually." "Eventually?" I scoffed. "These people are already covering their tracks, Hall. The longer you wait, the harder they'll be to find." Hall paused. "What are you saying, Jake?" "I'm saying I can't sit here and pretend this is over," I snapped. "You saw what they tried to do to me. Morris wasn't calling the shots, and you know it. Let us handle it," Hall said firmly. "You've done your part." I hung up without answering. That evening, Rebecca walked into the living room, where I sat staring blankly at the TV. "You're still thinking about him, aren't you? The guy at the docks?" I said, rubbing my face. "Yeah, he's still out there." Rebecca hesitated before speaking. "Jake, you can't keep chasing this. Morris is in jail. You've done everything you can." I looked at her, the words burning on my tongue. "What if this isn't the end, Beck? What if they come after me again? Or after Carla? Or the kids?" She frowned, folding her arms. "Then you go to the police." "The police didn't see him," I shot back. "They didn't look him in the eyes. He's dangerous, Rebecca. He'll find another Morris, another puppet, and this will all start over." Later that night, I sat on the edge of the couch with Carla's letter in my hand, the words a constant reminder of how deep this nightmare went. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Jake, you need to tell me everything," I said, skipping any pleasantries. Carla was silent for a moment before she spoke. "I've already told the police." "Not them. Me," I said sharply. "What else do you know, Carla? Who else is involved?" Her voice trembled. "Jake, you don't understand. These people, they're not like Morris. They don't leave loose ends." "Then why did you get involved?" I pressed. "I thought it would be easy," she whispered. "Morris said it was harmless. Just fake claims. No one would get hurt. But then it grew. He started pulling in money for them. And by the time I realized what was happening, I couldn't get out." I exhaled slowly. "Who are they, Carla?" "I don't know their names," she admitted. "Morris never told me. But I heard him on the phone once. He called someone Harrison." "Harrison?" I repeated, committing it to memory. "Jake, please," she begged. "Let it go. If you keep pushing, they'll come after you." I hung up without responding. Rebecca found me later, staring at my laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked cautiously. "Looking up anyone named Harrison," I replied. If Morris had connections, they had to go through someone real, someone with a name. "You're obsessing," she said, sitting beside me. "Maybe," I admitted. "But if there's even a chance of finding out who's pulling the strings, I have to take it." Hours passed, and I got nowhere. Harrison was too common a name, and Morris's files didn't mention it anywhere. I was chasing shadows, and I knew it. Finally, I closed the laptop and leaned back, exhaustion catching up with me. "Maybe you're right," I muttered. "Maybe I should let this go." Rebecca gave me a sad smile. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away, Jake. You've done enough." I nodded, trying to believe her. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I spent the next day trying to pretend life was normal. Rebecca insisted I take a break, even if it was just for my sanity, so I busied myself with small things, helping her clean, sorting through emails, meaningless tasks that wouldn't stop my mind from racing. But I couldn't let it go. I could feel it in my bones. There was something unfinished. Late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You're looking in the wrong places, Jake. Back off while you can." The message sent a chill down my spine. I showed Rebecca, who read it with wide eyes. "It's them," she whispered. "Jake, you need to tell Hall." I shook my head. "No, they're watching me. If I go to Hall, they'll disappear again." "Jake, you promised." "I'm not stopping now." I interrupted, my voice firm. "This proves I'm close. Whoever Harrison is, they're scared." I spent hours in front of my laptop that night, digging deeper into the name Carla had given me. Morris's operation was tangled and messy, but money always left a trail, even for the careful ones. Finally, I found something. An LLC, Harrison Holdings. It was buried beneath layers of fake companies and shell accounts, but it was there, siphoning funds from the same accounts tied to Morris's clinic. A name, a location. The LLC was registered to an office building downtown. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. "Got you." The next morning, I told Rebecca about the lead as I grabbed my jacket. "You're going there, aren't you?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah," I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "If I can find proof that Harrison's involved, the cops will have everything they need." She looked at me, her worry clear. "Jake, this could be dangerous. What if they're expecting you?" "Then I'll be ready," I said, more confidently than I felt. The office building downtown was sleek and polished, exactly the kind of place that hid dirty secrets behind tinted glass. I walked through the lobby, heart pounding, and took the elevator up to the third floor where Harrison Holdings was listed. The hallway was empty. The door to Suite 305 was locked, but a glance through the glass window showed an office inside. Neat, sterile, untouched. I knocked, but no one answered. I looked around quickly before pulling the small pry tool I'd brought from my bag. One careful shove, and the lock gave way. Inside, the place felt abandoned, like no one had been there for weeks. A single desk sat in the middle of the room, papers scattered across it. I moved quickly, sifting through the folders. Bank statements, names, transactions. It was all here. The web of fake companies and transfers Morris had been part of, but with Harrison's name stamped everywhere. But as I skimmed the pages, a sound made me freeze. Footsteps coming down the hall. I shoved the papers into my bag and ducked behind the desk just as the door opened. Someone stepped inside, their shoes clicking softly against the tile. I held my breath, trying not to move. "Gone already?" a man's voice muttered. I peeked out and saw him. A sharp suit, clean cut, the same man from the docks. "Harrison." He moved to the desk, his face darkening when he saw the open drawers and missing papers. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling out his phone. "We have a problem." He turned on his heel and left, slamming the door behind him. I waited until the hallway was silent again before I bolted. Back at Rebecca's, I dumped the contents of my bag onto the table, spreading the papers out. "What is all this?" she asked, hovering beside me. "Proof," I said, my voice steady. "Harrison's the one pulling the strings. He's the connection between Morris and everyone else." Rebecca stared at the documents. "Jake, you need to take this to Hall now. They can arrest him." I hesitated, my jaw clenching. If I don't go straight to him, Harrison will cover his tracks. I need Hall to move tonight. That evening, I called Hall and told him everything. "We've got him," Hall said, his voice firm. "Stay put, Jake. We'll handle this from here." I hung up and leaned back, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. Rebecca sat down across from me, her expression relieved but cautious. "Is it over?" she asked. "Almost," I replied, though something inside me still twisted with doubt. I didn't trust Harrison to go quietly. As I lay on the couch that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't quite finished. Harrison had slipped through before, but this time I had the proof. And if he came for me, I'd be ready. I didn't sleep. Every creak of Rebecca's house had me snapping awake, heart pounding. I couldn't shake the image of Harrison, the man at the docks, his cold voice on the phone. Morning came too soon. Hall called just after sunrise. "We raided the office last night," he said. "Harrison's gone. He cleared out." My stomach dropped. "You didn't find him?" "Not yet, but we've got officers combing the city. He won't get far." I gripped the phone tighter. "You don't understand, Hall. He doesn't run. He plans. If he's gone, it's because he's already 2 steps ahead." Hall paused. "We'll keep you updated. Stay close to Rebecca." I hung up and turned to Rebecca, who stood watching me nervously. "They didn't get him," I said flatly. Her face paled. "Jake, what if he comes here?" I grabbed my jacket, and the files still spread across the table. Then I'm going to end this first. Where are you going? She demanded. To find Harrison before he finds me. Jake, don't. I have to, I said, looking her in the eye. If I don't stop him now, it'll never end. I started with the connections. Old addresses tied to Harrison Holdings, empty businesses in forgotten parts of town. Most of them were dead ends. But the last location was different, an abandoned warehouse near the train yard. I parked a block away and watched the place, scanning for movement. A black SUV sat near the entrance, engine cold. Someone was here. My pulse quickened as I approached the side door. It was cracked open, faint voices echoing inside. I slipped in quietly, pressing my back against the wall. Burn it all, a voice said. Harrison. Calm, collected. No loose ends. Another man replied. What about Connolly? He's still out there. I'll take care of him, Harrison said smoothly. Like I said, no loose ends. That was all I needed to hear. I turned and bolted back out the door, adrenaline surging. I hit the street running, dialing Hall as I sprinted for my car. Hall! Harrison's at the warehouse near the train yard. He's destroying evidence. Stay put. Hall barked. We're on our way. But as I reached my car, a sharp voice called out behind me. Going somewhere, Jake? I turned slowly. Harrison stood there, calm as ever, with two men flanking him. I was out of time. Harrison's calm voice sent a chill through me. He stood with two men on either side, blocking my path to the car. You've been a real thorn in my side, Jake, he said, hands casually in his pockets, like this was a business meeting. But you've overstayed your welcome. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to stand tall. It's over, Harrison. The police are on their way. They have the evidence. He smirked, unbothered. Evidence disappears. People forget. What they won't forget is a troublemaker like you meeting a tragic end. He nodded to one of his men, who started advancing toward me. In that split second, I heard the faint, distant wail of sirens. Hall! The police were coming. Harrison's smirk faltered slightly, and I seized the moment. I turned and bolted. Stop him! Harrison barked. The men scrambled after me as I darted across the lot, my legs burning with effort. I skidded behind a rusted shipping container, catching my breath as footsteps closed in. Find him! One of the men shouted. Keep moving. I slipped between containers, each one a maze of rust and shadows. The sirens were louder now, closer. I needed to buy time, just a few more minutes. I grabbed a loose piece of metal from the ground and threw it into the far corner. The clatter echoed, and one of the men took the bait, shouting, Over here! I darted the other way, sprinting back toward the entrance. As I broke into the open lot, headlights blinded me. Police cars screeched to a stop, and officers poured out, shouting commands. Hands up! Get down! Harrison and his men froze, realizing they were surrounded. I turned to see Hall step forward, his gun drawn. Game's up, Harrison, Hall said firmly. You're done. Harrison's expression hardened, his calm mask finally slipping. You don't know what you're interfering with. Save it for the judge, Hall replied as officers swarmed them. Harrison's men dropped their weapons, and within seconds, they were cuffed and hauled away. Harrison stood still, his jaw tight, as they secured his wrists behind his back. As he passed me, he locked eyes with me, his voice low. This doesn't end with me, Jake. I stared back at him, unflinching. It does for you. The next few hours were a blur. Statements, evidence collected, phone calls. Hall pulled me aside as dawn broke over the train yard. We've got him, he said, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Harrison's going away for a long time. And with the evidence you brought in, we'll be able to track down the rest of his operation. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Good. It's about time. Hall clapped me on the shoulder. Go home, Jake. You've earned it. Rebecca was waiting for me outside the station when Hall dropped me off. She ran up, pulling me into a tight hug. Are you okay? She asked, tears in her eyes. I think so, I said, the weight of it all finally starting to lift. It's over. We stood there for a long time, the early morning sun warming my face. Come on, Rebecca said, smiling softly. Let's go home. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. I spent most of it with my kids, piecing my life back together one step at a time. Carla chose to stay away for now, working through her own mistakes. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive her, but I hoped she'd find a way to forgive herself. As for me, I wasn't whole yet, but I was moving forward, To anyone out there who's been blindsided, betrayed, or left in the dark, listen to me. It doesn't matter how far you fall or how hopeless it feels. You can get back up. You can fight back. Because the people who betray you don't get to decide your story. You do. What would you do if someone you trusted turned your life upside down? Could you move on? Or would you fight back? Let me know in the comments.